17. We had a wonderful parent support group in Chicago last night. Thank those of you who came out. And we have some nice ones coming up here in the future all along the East Coast. And we're going to be following the Wilderness Play, which starts its tour soon. So tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about feedback. We have a specific tool that we use. And I want to talk about the difference between feedback and the I feel statement. So like I said at the outset before I began recording tonight and was talking to the audience, this webinar won't be a full hour. It'll probably be 20 or 30 minutes. But what you can do is submit any questions that you want to Andrea. So when I get to the Q&A part, I'll answer topic-related questions first, and then I'll go to talk about any questions you have about anything that you might be challenged with or dealing with right now. So let's first start off with the idea, the concepts behind feedback. One of our expectations at Evoke with feedback is that it comes from a place of care and love. And I think the students, I think most people are really good at sensing when it comes from a place of judgment and anger. So before you give feedback to somebody, it's important to make sure that you're coming from a place of care and love. In order to create emotional safety and an environment that people feel safe, we have to be able to come from a place of love, and there are some tools, some skills that we can add to that can help us along with that. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. This is simply what the structure looks like, and then I'm going to get to some of the other principles and concepts behind it. It's a three-part in contrast to the I feel statement, which is a four-part feeling statement. This is a three-part, and it starts off with an observation, something that you see. It is my observation, and you try to make that as objective as possible. Just like in the I feel statement, when you're talking about your belief, it's very important to separate out as much as you can the subjective from the objective. And simple examples are something like, instead of saying, when you were mad at me, you would say something like, when you raised your voice and walked out of the room. When you left the room and slammed the door. Right? That's different than when you were mad at me. So it's important that you describe the behavior. When you didn't show up today. When you were late tonight. When you looked at me with a frown while we were talking. Right? As much as possible, give the objective information. It's my perception, and this is a lot like the part of the I feel statement where we are talking about the belief or interpretation. It's my perception, and then you say, it's my perception that maybe you didn't care about me at that time, or you were frustrated with me, or you wanted to get away, or you were sad, or you were hurt, or you were afraid. So you're giving a guess at the interpretation, right? This is what you're offering, how you've interpreted the objective information. And then you offer a suggestion. So I have a thought, I have an idea, you might try this. What if you tried this? Would you be willing to try this? So it's pretty simple, objective, subjective, and suggestion. Now, that's not very complicated, but I think like a lot of the things that we talk about and teach at Evoke, it's what's underneath it that becomes the gold. Let's talk about the difference, first of all, between feedback and the I feel statement, because I think a lot of people think that the I feel statement is intended for feedback. And ideally and fundamentally, it's not. First of all, by breaking down the feedback into these three separate parts, we find that the feedback is better received. Right? The structure, just like with the I feel statement, the structure sets people up for success. Right? It puts me in the mode of, okay, I'm going to listen to your ideas. I'm going to listen to your thoughts. I'm going to listen to your suggestion. Immediately, I can detach myself from it, not take ownership of it, and realize that this is an exercise. So the formality of it actually offers the receiver an opportunity to take a step back. It also helps the speaker look closely at the facts of the situation and comment accordingly. That distinction between objective and subjective is critically important. If we can't see our interpretation of things as separate from the actual event itself, we lack a kind of differentiation, right? We lack the ability to separate out our thoughts and beliefs and our observations. And that's a very important distinction to keep. The higher thinking, the more rational thinking, the higher level brain functioning, the more we're going to be able to keep those separate. the lower, more trauma-based, more flight and fight response, the more we're going to blend those two together, right? For many people, they talk about this idea that they can't separate out what they interpret, excuse me, and what they observe. That's just a challenge for them to separate those things out. As you work through this tool, you'll find that it serves as a powerful complement to the I feel statement. With the I feel statement, you're focusing on expressing your thoughts and emotions. The intention with the I feel statement is not to speak about the listener's actions and emotions. Feedback, on the other hand, allows you to do just that. Combining these tools will allow you to communicate assertively in a wide array of situations. Again, like a lot of our skills, like a lot of our tools, I talk about this with our staff all the time. Tools and skills aren't going to do the work for you. They're really not. And I think sometimes we want them to. I think sometimes we believe that the tool itself will separate it out, will get the thing accomplished. And it's just as likely that we could use a tool to weaponize against somebody else as it is that it can become a healthy communication tool. So it's important to know that. The first thing is that it has to come from a place of love first, right? There's actually a book called Love First, written by a couple that's about intervention. And intervention essentially is feedback. And feedback is, if it's not grounded in love, then it's really not for the other person. It's really us venting, us taking something out on the other person. And it's likely to be sensed as such by the other person. Is this your need or there? Are you trying to be helpful? Or is this something about your anxiety, your frustration, and your anger? One of the differences between the I feel statements is, and this is, you're not talking about your feelings as they relate to the facts, right? You're really grounded, you're really clear, and you're just observing and offering a suggestion. And whereas the I feel statement, the feeling is the goal, the feeling is the core. We are talking about what we're seeing and what we're interpreting, but it's really about owning the feeling. It's about ownership. This is about offering something to be helpful to another person. Being aware of your anger, frustration, and judgment. When those are present, it's much less likely to be heard. And you're much more likely to be doing it for a different reason. We have a practice here that we often ask, are you open to it? Are you open to feedback before you do it? I have some thoughts, I have some ideas. Would you be open to those right now? And by making it a request, by making it something they can say no to, we're also empowering them. We're also proceeding in a moment that they're going to be less defensive about it. Be prepared to abandon the process if they become defensive. And again, if you're able to stop midway through because it's becoming argumentative or they're becoming defensive, it's a sign that you're not enmeshed in that situation. You're not over-involved. Right? You're not doing it from a place of your need. That's very, very important. If they start to get defensive and you're unwilling, unable to pull out of it, then you had some other energy in it, more than just to be helpful. One of the things that we do is we often ask you to practice this in a letter. Practice it in a letter that you're writing, and it's critical. I think I talk about this a lot. It's important to detach yourself from their response. If you get invested in their response, they need to respond a certain way. Then again, it's really about your need, not about the want to be helpful. That's one of the signs, one of the pieces of evidences. And on the receiving end of feedback, can we hear it as somebody's observation? I tell this story about a student that I had many years ago. And when he first entered the program, he was extraordinarily defensive. Big guy, strong guy, tough guy, but incredibly defensive about everything that everybody was offering him, any observations that people are offering. And after 3, 4, 5 weeks, he started to open up into the process and was really welcoming and able to listen to feedback and people's observations without becoming defensive. He was able to kind of chew on it, digest it, see if it fit for him. Did very well. Fast forward many years later, I was invited to an intervention. He was now a young adult, was struggling with a whole new set of problems, and his parents thought that he needed an intervention. And so they called me in, and I flew out there, and I showed up, and there was this kind of setup where he was coming over to one of his parents' house for something, and he walked in the door, and he saw me, another professional, his parents, some people sitting there, and he threw up his arms and said, you know, F this, I'm not going to stay here. Screw this. And then he caught a glimpse of me. He hadn't seen me for many years. And he saw me and he remembered something. Something connected to him. And so he said, oh, Brad's here. Maybe I'll give this a chance. He sat down next to me, and the interventionist, it wasn't me, the interventionist invited the father to the letter that he had prepared. And the father started reading this letter. The son stood up immediately again, angry, and said, screw this. I'm not going to do this. I've heard all this crap before. He was being a little bit more expletive than that. But I asked him, I said, Sam, just sit down for a second. Remember when you were with us and you couldn't hear feedback, and then several weeks into the program, you were able to hear it as just somebody else's idea and it didn't necessarily have to be true or not? Remember that? And he kind of nodded, and I said, how about if you try that again? And then he said, okay, I'll stay. He ended up listening with some difficulty, some small difficulty, to everybody's feedback, everybody's concern for him. And by the end of the day, he had checked himself into a residential program. So it is something that you can become practiced at. And even in this case, although it was dormant for a while, because he hadn't been in the practice of it, he understood that you can just hear what somebody else thinks without necessarily owning it. There's a saying in the field that the clients and students often use, and it goes like this: if it fits, let it sit. If it doesn't apply, let it fly. And I talk about it this way. I think I said this just the other night. If it's true, there's really nothing to be defensive about. And if it's not true, there's really nothing to be defensive about. The thing that we get defended about is the judgment that comes, the anger, the disgust, the condescending attitude that people have towards us with the feedback, right? That's the hardest stuff to not take offense to. And so that's why on the front end, on the giver's end, it's very important that it comes from a place of love. It's not charged with all those other emotions, and you have a level of detachment about it. There's obviously a practice of vulnerability in this for both people, I think, but of course more specifically, more emphatically for the one that's receiving the feedback. As the receiver of feedback, it's important to kind of own your response. You know, that if you're, you know, there's a line in The Knight in Rusty Armor where Merlin says a couple of things to the knight as he starts his journey, and the knight takes a lot of offense to it, and Merlin said, I'm just telling the truth, I don't mean to be offensive. And I think it's important that we understand, yes, sometimes there's judgments from other people, and sometimes feedback is hard. Feedback is painful. Can we be inviting of it? Can we ask for it more? Don't base your own openness on how they feel or say. That's the ideal. In other words, try to listen to it even if it comes out a little bit sideways. Even if it is charged, if you're on the receiving end. Do your best to do that. And that takes groundedness, that takes a level of security. It might require a timeout on your part, so that you're feeling okay about yourself. Can you see the other person? Can you hear their experience in it? Can you empathize or understand their side of it? As a parent, I would say it this way: let it inform you, but you don't have to believe the ultimate truth of it absolutely. It's just somebody else's idea and perception. And you don't need to fix it or react without running it through your filter carefully. Like, let it inform you, but don't let it dictate your response. Check with your therapist at Evoke. It is one of the skills and the tools that we have in the process. Check with your therapist at Evoke and consider practicing it in the letter. This is one of our therapists who writes this. For this week's letters, I'd like you to comment on this tool and offer a piece of positive feedback and one piece of constructive feedback. And then please refer to the examples below. The examples that this therapist, Dr. Matt Hoig, our clinical director at Entrada, offers is this. Example 1 for positive. It is my observation of you writing me letters each week. It is my perception that you're putting in a lot of effort and thought. It is also my perception that our communication has improved because of your effort. It is my suggestion that you continue to work hard with letters so that we can continue to grow. Pretty simple. Constructive. It is my observation that you're writing letters to me each week. It is my perception that you're not putting in much effort. It is my aim to meet you to meet the minimum one-page requirement from Matt and Anthony. It is also my perception that you are being lazy. It is my suggestion that you put more effort into the letters you write and try responding to my questions in greater depth. So that's Matt's example that he gives to his parents that they might offer. I added this on there to ask it from your child. Ask for feedback in the format from your child. Remember, the format is a way to guide us, but it doesn't do the work. And without the foundation and the feelings and the judgment issues resolved, it doesn't matter how well you do the format. What are the take-homes? Be aware of the defenses that you have and that other people have and honor them. And be able to pull back. To get into a power struggle or battle over it, it's not going to work. Nobody opens up after the discussion gets heated. Ask for permission. Ask if the other person is open to it. And like my therapist always tells me, strike while the iron is cold. Right? In the heat of the moment, if you're feeling escalated or you're sensing they're feeling escalated, it's most likely not going to be successful. Make sure that you pay attention to whether you're coming from a place of love, a place of judgment, or other difficult, harsh, escalated feelings. Practice it and learn to internalize it. Learn to recognize what it can teach you in the process and practice it some more. Ask for it and model responding to it with openness. In other words, ask your child for feedback. I talked earlier this week about the impact letter that a child writes to a parent, which is not exactly in this format, but very similar to this process. One of the best ways we can encourage emotional safety in a relationship is for us to risk first, for us to be vulnerable first, because it makes sense, doesn't it? If you're vulnerable, you're not a threat. And so start with setting the example of it. Start with being willing to open up and being willing to listen to the feedback and part of the process. All right. I'm happy to take any live questions on this topic or another. Question is, how is my perception different from the I feel statement? I think, like I said, there's some overlap. There's some similarities. But this one is not about you expressing your feelings. It's not about venting. It's not about being heard emotionally. It's not about getting clear about your own emotions. It's about observation. And that's why I think the invitation class is so important. Even in therapy, when I'm talking to my clients, the language that I use is, I have a thought. Are you open to it? Right? I'm doing a very similar process. I don't come in uninvited. It's not for me. It's not because I'm feeling charged or energetic. So there's some overlap to these two skill sets, but they serve different purposes, come from a different place, have ultimately different goals. I don't want I feel statements to be the primary mode for asking somebody to change, for encouraging somebody to change. Right? When I'm doing the last part of the I feel statement, which is within my control and outside of my control. What's in my control is I can learn to listen better. What's outside of my control is I hope you'll continue to be honest and open up with me. Right? That's just a hope. But a lot of parents will use the I feel statement as if it is boundary setting, as if it is feedback. And it's not that primarily. It's more for you to get clear. So there's some overlap, but there's some of the differences. Next question. I've struggled in the past with someone in the family. In my opinion, misusing the I feel statement. How do I respond when I feel this is happening? That's a fantastic question. The I feel statement gets misused dramatically. I mean, the best example is to have a discussion around it when you're not in a heated moment. Strike why the iron is cold. Talk about, have a discussion with what's the purpose of it. I mean, my book and the webinar on the I feel statement talks about the likelihood that somebody might use it for a weapon. So because that's a possibility, and I talk about it in the book, and I talk about the webinar on the I feel statement, you can talk about it from that perspective. But another thing that happens from an I feel statement, if you, this is tricky. If you treat an I feel statement that's being intended to be used as a weapon, as controlling, if you treat it as if it's not, if you treat it that it's just at face value an I feel statement, it's one of the best ways to interrupt that pattern. So if you came in with me with a bunch of aggression and a bunch of anger and a very loud judgmental I feel statement, very manipulative I feel statement, and I just heard it as you being angry or scared or hurt or whatever, I just heard it that way, even if I had to kind of practice that, right? Concentrate on that, it loses its power. It loses its ability to hurt or to do damage in the relationship. So first idea is talk about it not when you're in conflict. Read up on the chapter in my book, look at the webinar, and then do your best to hear it, take it at face value as if it's an I feel statement. Some of my most proudest moments as a communicator are when somebody came at me with either a non-I feel statement or an I feel statement that was intended to hurt me, and I just listened to it. Those are the moments when I've congratulated myself the most, because I'm doing my part of the work, even if they're not, and it's okay. So that's my thought about it. Next question. I have been challenged to find a place of love and putting the hard boundary at the moment. My son cannot live at home now. I can only support recovery. It is a challenge to come from a place of love and also to set a boundary. Let me make this comment. The key piece for a lot of people is love can't come at the expense of you. You get to be taken care of. You get to be okay. So if you start with that, like, I need this in my home, my son can't live here because he's using, for example, that's love of self. Then if you can approach the other person with love and compassion after that, it's okay. And it also speaks to this fact that I think we sometimes make the mistake of equating love with boundarylessness. The Dance of Anger book, the Dance of Anger webinar, is a fantastic resource for that. It's okay to love yourself. It's okay to take care of yourself. Number one. Number two, it's important that you then set yourself up to approach them with love and remind yourself that having boundaries, although it might be interpreted and people might say that you're not caring, having boundaries doesn't mean that you don't love. Next question. Let me move this out of the way. Recently, my daughter has been saying quite often that I am not being loving toward her. I find myself not knowing how to respond. I hear her saying that I am not giving her something she needs. In that moment, I feel angry and manipulated when she says this, especially since she has adopted this as some kind of mantra. Can you give me some coaching about how to respond to that in the moment? Right now, it just shuts me down. I think the thing that I want to tune into most is this one phrase that you use. You said, I feel angry and manipulated. Manipulated, it's not a feeling, of course. It's a verb, right? It's something that's happening. And being manipulated is something that you have to participate in. So like most parents, she has access to your triggers. She has access to your vulnerabilities. She has learned unconsciously over the years about what kind of mother you want to be, what kind of father you want to be, what kind of parent you want to be, okay? And she has found through an infinite number of interactions that when she tells you you're not being that thing that you strive to be, that you are then triggered by it and tend to waver and tend to come in a different way with them, right? That's what happens. That's what she's learned. So the best way to do it is to not see it as about you, to see it as about her. When somebody, the 4 agreements, we just posted the podcast on the 4 agreements just yesterday. When somebody says you're wonderful, it's not about you. When somebody says you're horrible, it's not about you. And when you have a differentiation, you can see them, right? But you've got to have that internal copy. That's the missing ingredient. That's the magic. If you know that you're okay, if you know that you're a loving mother, and that comes, in my experience, through therapy, right? If you know that, then when somebody says you're not that, there's no reason to be defensive. It's like if somebody came up to me and said, you don't have a nose. I would say, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but seems like you're confused about something, right? So it takes a foundation. It takes a sense that you're okay. She has access to your buttons. She knows what you need to be to feel okay. And so you can't convince her that you love her. I mean, if you haven't convinced her by now, and I know who you are, if you haven't convinced her by now, you'll never be able to do it. So you can just let go of convincing her that you're a loving, caring mother. And then just give it back to her. Next question. There are times when I've responded that I am not open to feedback and have had the person wanting to give it be angry. Yeah. Then it's a good sign that it wasn't coming from a loving, patient, helpful place. It was coming because they were frustrated or angry. Remember, think about it in therapy. As a therapist, I'm not giving feedback. I'm not giving my thoughts and ideas because I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm anxious. I'm giving thoughts and ideas to be helpful. And that's why if somebody says to me, that's a stupid idea, my response is, yeah, maybe it is. I don't have agenda in it. So that reaction that you're giving is just evidence that it wasn't coming from a place of patience and love. Good example, though. All right, I'll scroll through the upcoming slides. Thank you for the questions and comments. The intensives and workshops. We want all parents to go to a workshop if you can. There are the upcoming dates. The Finding You are the ones that I run in Park City that are deeper, more personal work. If you want to go a lot deeper into your work, March is filling up. We have a couple of spots left in March. We can open up. If we end up filling up, and we're starting to fill up more and more, if we end up filling more, we're going to do 2 per month going forward. And also, if you want to do a custom one or a family one, you can also contact us about that, and we can set up some dates.